So you remember when the US government sort of briefly kind of did a little something to pretend that they cared about the pandemic, and they like gave regular people, some of them, like $1,000 6 months ago? Well, they also allocated a bunch of money to be handed off to corporations and also to the military. And they were nice enough, were they not merciful, to make at least a little bit of it kind of targeted at doing something about the pandemic rather than just an obvious blatant slush fund for corporations to take to just boost up their profits artificially. Of course, some of it turned out not to be used for the reason it was allocated for. And we have a new report coming out of the Washington Post with a $1 billion fund that Congress gave the Pentagon in March to build up the country's supplies of medical equipment has been mostly funneled to defense contractors and used to make things like jet engine parts, body armor, and dress uniforms. Isn't that fun? Okay, so let's talk about a few of these individual awards. $183 million to firms including Rolls-Royce and ArcelorMittal to maintain the shipbuilding industry. Tens of millions of dollars for satellite, drone, and space surveillance technology. $80 million to a Kansas aircraft parts business suffering from the Boeing 737 MAX grounding and the global slowdown in air traffic. And $2 million for domestic manufacturer of Army dress uniform fabric. Bear in mind, these sorts of, like, just handing money so that they can stay afloat while the lockdown was briefly happening, there's already funds for that. And many of these corporations already have benefited from that. They're just also taking the money that was supposed to go towards producing N95 masks, ventilators, and things like that, and they're just putting it into jet parts, basically. I understand.
No, they double dipped. They double dipped. They 100%. Took the money from, and they did they took the PPP loans. And they took this money and they still gave it to defense contractor buddies because Esper, who's the defense secretary, is literally a Raytheon lobbyist who now has that position. So now we're just open about the corruption. It's totally fine. And then they have the gall in the next stimulus bill to ask for $11 billion more. Where do we know that's going to go? Like, you were supposed to be creating masks and securing PPE, and you wanted to dress your soldiers up a little bit nicer and gave it to those industries. It's insane. Yeah.
Well, okay. Insane might be going a bit far. I mean, they do need to buy uniforms, and you have to understand, Emma, that the U.S. military is basically running on fumes in terms of its budget. I mean, its 2019 fiscal budget was only $686 billion. How could they afford uniforms with those nickels and dimes that we're giving them to defend the homeland? And look, this is where it gets even sadder, I guess, because despite the fact that our military budget is still about where it was at any given year during the Cold War or right after 2001, despite the fact that we have no active adversaries, we still need a budget as if we're going to take on the entire rest of the world and the moon. That budget was supported by any number of different Democrats. The funding going to them, the fact that there weren't stronger regulations to make sure that it was actually put into the industry as it's supposed to, a lot of Democrats support that. But Bernie Sanders is the bad guy for trying to cut the budget by just 10%.
Which is 10%. less than what it was when Trump entered office. Like, it would, or I'm sorry, the percentage is less. It would still be more than what it was at the start of 2017. But that they can't even do. Democrats can't even do. The vote was like 23-77 or something like that. Like half of Democrats wouldn't even support that bill.
Exactly. I mean, we're in the middle of a crisis. People are dying. And can we really do anything about it? I don't know, like enhanced unemployment. We don't have the money for it. We need to get new dress doilies for the F-35 or something. They can always find something to put that money into, either the Department of Defense or police departments locally. Those budgets they'll never even stabilize, let alone go down. But the American people, you're sort of on your own. I mean, is it really an economic crisis? Sure, tens of millions are out of work, but the stock market's kind of going back up. It's just the priorities are so clear, and people still just don't really care. And I get part of it is that the Dems aren't really that much better on this, either because they get donations from the same industries or because they still believe after decades that if we just show that we support the military as much as the Republicans, we'll stop losing on that. as if Republican voters would ever switch over just because you give more funding to the Marines. I don't know what the reason is. It's not acceptable. And this, look, it's $1 billion. It's a significant amount of money, but it is just a drop in the bucket of how insane our entire strategy as a country is in terms of how we allocate funding to domestic priorities versus the military.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.